This is a real story that happened to me in my sophomore year of high school. I was texting a girl at around midnight, and she told me to come over, so I grabbed my skateboard and snuck out the front door, leaving it open slightly. I skated to the main road where I saw two police cars creating a roadblock in the middle of the street. I ducked into a neighborhood because I was only 15 and wasn't supposed to be out this late. I continued skating when I heard a helicopter from up above. It was a police helicopter with a spotlight, and it looked like it was searching for someone. They shined their light on me, and I waved at them, but they continued flying in circles looking for whoever it was they were looking for. At some point, I decided that I would get in trouble if they saw me climbing a fence to that girl's house because they might confuse me with their suspect, so I chose to skate back home. On the way, I saw a white van drive past me on the road. After a while, I made it back into my neighborhood, and I was only 3 blocks from my house when I saw that same van drive by me, but it passed me and drove up the road. Then I saw it come back around in the opposite direction towards me, like they had just done a U-turn, which was uncommon on this street. But then when they drove by again, they made yet another U-turn. I knew something was up, so I skated as fast as I could onto my street, turning the corner before they could see me. I hid behind some bushes and watched them as they drove by me very slowly, like they were looking for me. Once I saw them go by, I got back on my skateboard and skated so fast home that I made it there within seconds from blocks away. I got inside and shut the door. I was looking out the window and saw the same van drive past my street extremely slowly, but they never found me. I don't know what they were trying to do or why they were in my neighborhood. This happened to me late last summer. I was between 11th and 12th grade, and I was enjoying what was left of my time off from school. Throughout the summer, I had been visiting my friends who lived in a different part of the city than me. I would ride the bus there usually at least 2 or 3 times a week, since that's where all my good friends lived. We would usually just walk around and talk about random stuff. There was a mall around there, where we would hang out and sometimes get some pizza or ice cream when one of us had money. Most of the time when I was there, we noticed an old guy who was probably at least 50 years old. He had long gray hair, ripped clothes, and usually smelled like alcohol. He usually kept to himself, and we did the same. However, one time when we were outside the mall, that guy came up to us and started talking. We didn't know how to react because everything he was saying was just really wild conspiracy theories and other stuff that we didn't care about. He went on for several minutes, until my friend Josh made some kind of sarcastic comment. I can't remember exactly what. As soon as he did that, the old guy got really angry and started yelling at us. We just laughed in his face when he did that. I know it's disrespectful, but we were kids and he shouldn't have been bothering us in the first place. Eventually, he just walked away. Once he was gone, my friends and I looked at each other and laughed some more. After a couple weeks, I had almost forgotten about the incident. I'd been back a few times since then, and we hadn't seen him. When I went back at the end of August, I wasn't worried at all. This time we were having a party at my friend Adam's house. There were about 10 of us there, just hanging out and talking mostly. Eventually it was past midnight, and I had missed the last bus back to my part of the city. I had made that mistake before, and I would normally walk home when that happened. It was about an hour-and-a-half walk, but I didn't mind that much. It was well worth it to sleep in my own bed, instead of on Adam's couch. After I said goodbye to the guys, I started walking down the sidewalk. There were bright lights lining the streets, and quite a few cars driving by, so I didn't worry too much. After about 10 minutes, I started to get the feeling that I was being watched. I stopped walking for a minute and looked around. There was nothing. However, I did notice that the street had calmed down considerably. In fact, it was pretty deserted. I was all alone, it seemed. As soon as I was about to start walking again, I felt a tap on my shoulder. When I turned around, I saw the wrinkled face of that old guy from before. We stood there looking at each other for a few seconds, and then he said, "Hey buddy, do you know what time it is?" Yeah, it's 12:30, I said. Then he just stood there looking at me. No response, no thank you, nothing. It was really awkward. After another long few seconds, I slowly turned around and started walking away. I had to fight the urge to look back because I didn't want him to know that I was scared. Eventually, I couldn't resist, so I turned my head and looked back. The guy was following me. He was around 20 feet back, and he was walking at my pace. I think he was waiting until we were in a more secluded spot to make a move. When I realized that, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't end up alone with this guy in a dark alley or anything like that, and I knew that there were probably some sections on my way home that would give him an opportunity to do whatever was on his mind. I had to do something, so I simply started jogging. Not running like I was scared or anything, just a light jog. I figured that this guy probably couldn't keep up with me for long. I turned my head, looked back, and sure enough the guy was jogging too. Now there was no doubt that he was after me. I kept a constant pace, and eventually, he started falling back. After another 10 minutes or so, he was gone. I made it back home at around 1 a.m. and went straight to bed. I told my friends about what happened, but they didn't take it too seriously. I, however, found it really scary, and I will try not to miss that bus again. Who knows what that guy would have done if he'd caught me off guard. I should mention that I previously lived in a tiny town, but I went to high school in a considerably larger city. I'm a girl, and I was in the 10th grade at the time. I never had a reason or the nerve to go out in the city on my own, so when my two friends wanted to hang out around town, I was nervous to say the least. However, I decided to go with them anyway. We had a blast for a couple of hours after school. A few scary incidents happened along the way. We walked through a store full of expensive statues and gemstones, with a massive backpack protruding from my back. One wrong step, and I would have owed more money than I'd ever seen in my life. That and the original restaurant we wanted to go to was closed, so we had to go to Subway instead. However, something much worse happened as it got dark. It was coming time for us to go home, so we enjoyed one last store and then went our separate ways. I called my mother for a ride and waited outside the store, alone in the dark, not terribly afraid yet. I had told my mother where to find me, but she's hopeless with directions, so I had expected to be hanging around for a while. I noticed a news camera stationed outside the store, which made me feel a little safer. But about 10 minutes into the wait, I was approached by two men. Both were at least 30 years old, but they dressed like teenagers with baggy pants and backwards baseball hats. One was short and muscular, the other was probably 6'2" and overweight. My memory is fuzzy due to how freaked out I was, but this is what I remember. They asked me where some town was that I'd never heard of. I shook my head. I was already nervous because I'm a paranoid person on the best of days, and this was not turning out to be the best of days. "Oh, come on," one man coaxed. "Listen, we'll give you a bag of jewelry if you help us," the other man said. Now I was genuinely freaking out. I glanced around and noticed that the news camera had stepped a little closer to us. "Listen," I said, trying really hard not to show how freaked out I was. "I think it's this way, and I don't know anything else," I said, pointing in some random direction. They glanced in the direction of my finger, then glanced back. "Can you show us?" "Again, we have a bag of jewelry," the larger man said. It felt as if my heart had leaped into my throat. "No thank you, and my mom is coming to get me," I declined as calmly as I could. They stared at me for a few seconds, then nodded, thanking me and heading off in the direction that I'd pointed at. I kept well in the line of sight of the news camera until my mother picked me up. I didn't fully relax for a week. I have absolutely no idea why they were so eager to give me a bag of jewelry. My first thought was that they stole it and wanted to throw the police off their trail by handing it to someone else. The second was that they were trying to lure me away with the jewelry. I wonder what would have happened if the news camera wasn't there. I suspect that that's the reason that they backed off when they did. Either way, it wouldn't have ended well for me. No one believed me, but I didn't expect them to. Since then, I've never felt comfortable alone in the city after dark. It's been 2 years since then, and I live in a larger city now for college. This happened just yesterday, when my best friend Anne and I were hanging out as we normally do at my house. We were really bored, so we decided to take a calm walk around my neighborhood, or so we thought. There was a hospital nearby, and my neighborhood has a history of drug and alcohol-related incidents, but those don't happen very often. Nevertheless, it was kind of a dodgy place. Anne and I were talking and messing around and such for the entire walk, having a blast in each other's company. Eventually, we were about to head back to my house and finish the walk. We had just turned a corner. There were houses on one side, a park on the other side, and there was a 2-lane road separating them. My house was on the right side of the park. Anne and I were walking down the footpath on the side of the park towards my house, in silence, just taking in the views. When we were about 50 meters away from my house, I heard a single footstep about 15 or 20 meters away from Anne and I. Only one. I casually turned around, expecting to see a young teenager or an old person, because that's usually who you would see walking around these footpaths in my area. But what I saw will be burned into the back of my head for years. 15 meters away from us, there was this off-looking man. He looked young, I'd say mid-20s, with a skinny figure and dull but fierce-looking eyes. He wore a dark hoodie and jeans, and he was looking at me with this unsettling expression in his eyes. But the absolute worst part about it was that this man was limping very aggressively, walking very quickly towards me and Anne. It looked unnatural, like he was possessed, and he was grinning at me with the creepiest smile I've ever seen. It was twisted. His head was cocked to the side, and his teeth were so yellow that I could see them from 15 meters away. He looked psychotic, and he looked like he wanted to harm us. I whipped my head back around and told Anne to start walking back to my house quickly, because running might make the guy angry and cause him to run after us. We didn't know if he was high or drunk or not, but I was so panicked that I didn't even mention why we should head back home in such a hurry. Anne turned around and almost screamed. She stared in shock. I've never in my life seen someone with that kind of look on their face before. I grabbed her wrist and we sped up to get back to the safety of my house. I turned around and we saw the man about 9 or 10 meters away from us. He was moving quicker with that disturbing broken limb of his. It looked very unnatural and scary. We were 2 young teenage girls, and even if we both fought against the man, I don't think we would win, even if he was on the skinnier side. We sped up, and it was a chase. No running, but very close. We managed to get home safely, and when we were inside, I peeked through the window by myself because Anne was in shock for a bit. The man had slowed down, but he was still limping. He crossed over to the other side of the road for some reason, and went out of sight. I closed the curtains, my arms still shaking. After all that, Anne and I went back to the kitchen to grab some water. My kitchen window overlooks a bit of the park, and we have a decent view of it. We both saw that man slink back into the park, and we never saw him again after that. Afterwards, I thought about the whole incident, and probably got even more unsettled. I only heard one footstep, no pattern, nothing. Just a thump on the ground by a sneaker. That's it. It then hit me. That man was trying to attack us. He was trying to sneak up on us. It still gives me anxiety, knowing that if I didn't hear that single footstep, or didn't turn around, we could have been in some serious trouble. That man could have had a knife, or some other kind of weapon in his pocket. Who knows what could have happened?